Shalom, everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Motherland, African News with Garth. I'm your host, Garth, and I hope you all are enjoying your morning as we are in this new year. If you are new here, I will give you the intro. Quest Unite Africa's purpose is to promote the purpose of Exploring the Motherland, African News with Garth, is to promote the mission of Quest Unite Africa. And you're probably asking, what's the mission of Quest Unite Africa? The mission of Quest Unite Africa is to promote critical infrastructure and economic development for the benefit of the African Diaspora and the African continent. We do this through four main strategies. That would be medical, business, cultural engagement, and technological innovation. The show keeps you up to date on what's happening on the continent of Africa and how it relates to our mission, and just shows you what the work that we're doing here and why it's needed. So without further ado, Senegal to close all foreign military bases, and all links will be provided in the chat, and they're also in the description box. Senegal will close all foreign military bases on its territory as part of its government's effort to review defense policy and strengthen national sovereignty. Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko announced on Friday France has suffered setbacks in several of its former African colonies amid a wave of anti-French sentiment, sparked by perceived failures to counter militant insurgencies and accusations of meddling and aggression.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all kings and queens, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters here in the continent, and to those who are in the diaspora. So as we are approaching to close the year 2024, so I see that the future is so bright. As I speak to you now, there was a big announcement from Senegal. The president of Senegal has announced to close all foreign military bases and reform of the CFA flank. So, my dear kings and queens, the Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko said that the President of the Republic has taken the decision to soon close all foreign military bases on the national territory. Furthermore, he also announced the discussions with the Bank of Senegal for a major reform concerning the CFA flank, those marking a desire to strengthen the country's economy and strategic sovereignty. So soon we are going to see Senegal joining the Saharan countries, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and also Chad to expel France and close all France military bases. So this is the good news for the people of Africa, as well as to those who are Pan-Africanists concerned about the issue of sovereignty in the continent of Africa. So let me share the full announcement made by the Prime Minister of Senegal, Mr. Ousmane Sonko. Welcome and listen what Mr. Sonko has said.
One represent the National Assembly, Honourable Member of Parliament. The vision of Portuguese Senegal has been taken care of as soon as the government is formed, with in particular the requirement to defend in all first place the interests of Senegal, and never to let ourselves be dictated again, our conduct in public affairs management, and the defence of the Senegalese citizen, and the year for proof, openly displayed positions by colleague the President of the Republic in international bodies, whether to the United Nations tribe, at the Global Forum for Sovereignty and Vaccine Innovation, at the top of the Olympic Games, of Sustainable Development, At meetings of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, we militate for one rebalancing of global governance and respect for universal values of peace and human rights, in particular, the end of the genocide in Gaza and recognition of Zine rights and the Zinarianab of the Palestinian people, Odomara. Internally, the celebration of the 80th anniversary of the massacre of Senegalese riflemen at Keroual, December 1st mil-neuf-cent Quarante was an opportunity to affirm our requirement of sovereignty in the truncated fact-finding, made up and hidden for 80 to 80 years, normally at the expiration of its deadline, 1711 fishing agreements that linked Senegal to the European Union also mark our unilateral will to defend the interests of our fisheries, of our national armaments and our industry. Fishing Club, on monetary sovereignty of the African Monetary Union, our government had exchanges with the BBC on the status and prospects of the implementation work of the reform of the CFA franc, gaining sovereignty over defense matters. The President of the Republic announced the upcoming closure of the bases, foreign military in Senegal, of all military bases in Senegal. Finally, with regard to Senegal's foreign policy, the new bases have been laid, namely the return to abroad in the Senegalese diplomatic representation, with the title of career diplomat, and the focus put on strengthening cooperation links with African countries. At the President of the National Assembly in Europe, Member of Parliament, renewal of Senegal to the external interior plan cannot succeed without one effective public administration and ethics, as well as public societies of parapology, governed by one strict financial governance. It has been hammered by the President of the Republic and follow-up to the First Council of Ministers, with his letter of 8 of August 4th, 2024, transmitted individually to each agent of the state, to invite them to righteousness, creativity, always through the principles of God, by Dubois and Joe Bounty. We have listened and understood, on the President of the National Assembly in Arabic, Deputy the citizen request for better governance in the country, but we also gave one priority, in the last 8 months, to social demand of the Senegalese, who want a better quality of life. In this regard, we attacked the expensive life by setting up, as of June 2024, in a context of public finance in distress, measures to reduce rainfall and basic foodstuffs. Concerning the price of fuel and electricity, the necessary measures have been taken for the restoration of in the
All right, the link is in the chat if you would like to look at the rest of that video. So basically, this is just an example of the country of Senegal, its government doing what needs to be done. I titled this episode "The Enemy from Within" because they have an enemy from within their borders who has stifled their progress, who has done everything to, circumvent their sovereignty. And now they understand that sovereignty is important to progress the country. If you've all been watching this show or just have been, keeping up to date on Senegalese news, President Faye, the new president of Senegal, said pretty soon there will be no more foreign military bases in Senegal. He stressed that sovereign nations having foreign bases he stressed having foreign bases in the country is incompatible with the principle of sovereignty. Getting rid of French bases will help set a cultural standard for Senegal. That standard is putting national interest first. Furthermore, that means only making strategic partnerships that benefit Senegal's determination for economic growth and critical infrastructure.
Regarding the sovereignty in defense, the President of the Republic has announced the closing of all foreign military bases in Senegal.
Before proceeding further, it is essential to contextualize the historic and geopolitical significance of the speech delivered by Senegal's new Prime Minister, Ousmane Sonko. This speech represents a critical juncture in Senegal's political direction and reflects a broader wave of anti-colonial sentiments sweeping across Africa. Senegal is now actively moving to close all foreign military bases on its soil, with particular focus on French military establishments, a decision that underscores the waning influence of France in its former colonies. For decades, France maintained a strong military presence across Africa, particularly in its former colonies. This presence was justified under the guise of ensuring stability and combating terrorism. One of the most prominent manifestations of this military engagement was Operation Barkhane, a counterinsurgency mission launched in 2013 to combat Islamist extremism in the Sahel region. At its height, Operation Barkhane deployed over 5,000 troops across Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Chad. However, the operation...
Just to pause, you heard that? Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad. And now, isn't it ironic now all of them are kicking the French out? I think not.
The nation's reputation quickly deteriorated. Many Africans criticized it as a thinly veiled tool for neo-colonial exploitation, alleging that France was prioritizing its geopolitical interests, such as securing access to resources over the well-being of local populations. Citizens in the Sahel region accused France of exacerbating insecurity and poverty rather than alleviating them. These grievances culminated in widespread opposition, setting the stage for the eventual dismantling of French military operations across the region. The turning point came in May 2021, when Mali's military regime, led by Assimi Goïta, took power through a popular coup. One of the regime's first major actions was to order French troops out of the country. This decision was met with overwhelming public support, as Malians viewed it as a necessary step toward reclaiming their sovereignty. In response, France withdrew its forces in 2022, officially ending Operation Barkhane. This departure from Mali had a domino effect, inspiring other nations to follow suit and re-evaluate their military partnerships with France. In the years that followed, the expulsion of French forces became a recurring theme across Africa. 1. Central African Republic, COR. In December 2022, France withdrew its troops from the CRR, citing the country's growing alignment with Russia. The CAR's government had established close ties with the Wagner Group, a Russian paramilitary organization, making it increasingly hostile to French influence. 2. Burkina Faso and Niger. Both countries terminated long-standing military agreements with France and shut down all French military bases on their territories. This marked a significant break in France's traditional stronghold in the Sahel. 3. Chad. In December 2024, Chad, long considered one of France's most reliable allies, ordered the closure of all French military bases. Chad's government declared that its military partnership with France no longer aligned with the nation's security needs or aspirations for full sovereignty. Senegal, a country with deep historical ties to France, has now joined this growing list. Approximately 350 French soldiers are currently stationed in Senegal, but their presence is coming to an end. The decision to close all French military bases reflects the new administration's strong commitment to sovereignty and self-determination. President Bassirou Diomaye Faye, who assumed office less than a year ago, has taken a firm stance on the issue. He described the French military presence as incompatible with Senegal's sovereignty, emphasizing that the nation must prioritize its own security and governance. The withdrawal of French troops from Senegal marks the sixth instance of a former French colony ejecting French forces, a significant indicator of the broader shift in Africa's geopolitical landscape. Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko has long been a vocal critic of French influence in Africa, even before assuming office. His fiery rhetoric has resonated with a growing number of Africans who feel disillusioned by decades of perceived exploitation and interference by France. One of Sonko's most memorable speeches delivered before he rose to power captured global attention for its unapologetic condemnation of France's neo-colonial practices. He began the speech with a powerful metaphor stating, It is high time for France to lift its knee off our neck and put an end to this unjust oppression. Centuries of misery, human trafficking, colonization, and neo-colonization have caused immeasurable suffering. It's time to break the cycle of exploitation. Sonko's speech was a scathing critique of France's double standards in its dealings with Africa. He cited specific examples of France's selective condemnation of political regimes based on its interests. For instance, in Chad, where the constitutional process was interrupted by a military takeover, France openly supported the regime and even attended the leader's inauguration. In contrast, in Mali, where a transitional government was established following a coup, France condemned the regime and withdrew its troops, citing a breakdown in democratic principles. Sonko argued that such inconsistencies revealed France's true motives, maintaining control over African nations to serve its own geopolitical agenda. Sonko also criticized France's practice of grooming African leaders to perpetuate its influence. He accused France of manipulating African politics by bestowing symbolic honors, such as the Legion of Honor, upon potential allies, encouraging membership in elite societies, such as Masonic lodges, to cultivate loyalty among future leaders. We desire nothing from France except that she ceases meddling in our affairs. The people of Senegal and Africa must exercise their freedom of choice without undue influence. Despite his criticisms, Sonko expressed hope for a new era of equitable partnerships between Africa and France. We have nothing against the French people. Many within France, activists, politicians, and organizations, share our vision for a collaborative and just future. If France listens to these voices, we can envision a brighter future together. But if not, Africa will move forward without her. Sonko's speech reflects a broader Pan-African movement calling for self-determination and liberation from foreign dominance. His rhetoric aligns with the aspirations of African youth, elites, and the diaspora, who are united in their demand for true sovereignty.
And we'll stop there. Na, 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 na. Hey, hey, hey. Au revoir. Right, next story. Oh, what do you know? Now Ivory Coast says French troops to leave West African nation. French troops will begin with their withdrawal from Ivory Coast, or as the French call it, Côte d'Ivoire, in January 2025, as announced by the Ivorian government. This marks another significant reduction in France's military presence in West Africa. Ivory Coast's decisions follows similar moves by other West African nations, which have also requested the departure of foreign troops amid broader trend of reassessing military ties with former colonial powers. The former political power now appears to be devising a new military strategy of downscaling military ties, a measure that would sharply reduce its permanent troop presence on the continent. Basically, they understand, just like Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Chad, Senegal, that they need to secure their own borders, and they have an enemy from within that is circumventing their progress, and they need to do something to stand up to it and to create new initiatives and new policies that will help them get out of their economic hole, and not only that, to further develop their country. Link will be provided in the chat.
Have you ever imagined the audacity it takes for a nation, once shackled by colonization, to tell its former colonizer, it's time for you to leave? This is not a story from a distant past. It's unfolding right now in Côte d'Ivoire, a country that has boldly asked French troops to leave its soil. This move is more than a political decision. It's a defiant stand against decades of external control. It's a cry for sovereignty and self-determination, echoing across a continent long burdened by colonial shadows. Why is this happening now? What does it mean for the African continent? And why is the world watching so closely? This monumental decision by Côte d'Ivoire isn't just a localized event. It's a symbolic turning point in Africa's quest for independence and unity. From the bustling streets of Abidjan to the broader Sahel region, the implications are immense. If you're passionate about African history, culture, and stories that shape our future, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the African Web and hit that notification bell. Together, let's explore the narratives that matter most to Africa's past, present, and future. This isn't just about military presence. It's about reclaiming dignity, agency, and the power to determine one's own destiny. Côte d'Ivoire's stand is not just a national issue, but a continental call for change. It is a testament to Africa's growing assertion of its rightful place on the global stage. But before we delve into the details, let's reflect. What does true sovereignty look like for a nation like Côte d'Ivoire, and can this decision inspire others? To understand the magnitude of this decision, we must journey back in time to the colonial era. Côte d'Ivoire, like many African nations, was under French rule until gaining independence in 1960. However, independence was largely symbolic. The relationships forged during colonization persisted, particularly through economic and military agreements that kept France deeply embedded in the region's affairs. One of the most enduring legacies of this colonial relationship is the CFA franc. This currency, controlled by the French treasury, has long symbolized economic dependence. Critics argue that it stifles growth and perpetuates.
He calls it economic dependence. I call it economic warfare.
It's a neo-colonial dynamic. Military agreements have also played a crucial role in maintaining French influence. French troops were stationed in Côte d'Ivoire ostensibly to ensure stability. However,
to ensure stability, meaning to become an occupation force.
over time, many Ivorians began questioning whether these troops were protectors or symbols of lingering colonial control. The 21st century has witnessed a gradual awakening across Africa. Nations like Burkina Faso and Mali have already expelled French troops, citing the need for self-reliance and a desire to chart their own course. These bold moves have inspired neighboring countries to reassess their relationships with former colonial powers. In Côte d'Ivoire, public sentiment has been shifting for years. The presence of French troops became increasingly controversial, seen by many as an impediment to true independence. This growing frustration reached a tipping point when the government formally requested their withdrawal. Côte d'Ivoire's decision to expel French troops is not just a standalone event, it's part of a broader movement sweeping across Africa. This wave of nationalism and self-determination reflects a collective desire to break free from the chains of neo-colonialism. But what does this decision mean for Côte d'Ivoire, the region, and the world? The departure of French troops also raises critical questions about security. The Sahel region faces numerous challenges, including terrorism and insurgencies. Without French military support, can Côte d'Ivoire effectively manage these threats? The government must now invest heavily in its own defense infrastructure and foster regional cooperation to address these challenges. On the economic front, this decision could have far-reaching consequences. French military bases contribute to local economies, providing jobs and
Yeah, sure, whatever. This guy is, he's, obviously biased, so we're not going to even listen to the rest of that video. If you want to suffer why France is taking L's, then you could listen to the rest of the video. But let's go to first post, who is a lot more impartial and will just give you the facts of what's going on.
Hello and welcome. Now we are starting with the latest from West Africa, where the new year has kicked in with a renewed anti-colonial sentiment. Another nation in the region has joined the France out chorus, and that is Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has announced that French forces will withdraw from the West African nation this month. He made the announcement in an end-of-year speech.
My dear compatriots, dear brothers and sisters, we can be proud of our army, whose modernization is now a reality. It is within this framework that we have decided on the coordinated and organized withdrawal of French forces from Ivory Coast. Thus, the camp of the 43rd Marine Infantry Battalion in Port Bouet will be handed over to the armed forces of Ivory Coast starting this January 2025.
Hours before Ivory Coast, Senegal also confirmed that French troops will leave the nation by the end of this year. The Senegalese president, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, has said that this year would see an end to all foreign military presence in the country. Earlier, he also announced France would have to close its military bases on its territory. 2024 has been a tough year for France in West and Central Africa, and setbacks for Paris have clearly spilled into the new year. Over the last 2 years, France was forced out of several of its former colonies. It started with the coup belt of West Africa after the military government took charge in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They kicked France out. And then Chad, which was considered France's most stable and loyal partner in Africa, abruptly ended its military cooperation with its former colonial power. Now, France has handed over its first military base in the country. Now, most recently, Senegal and Ivory Coast have joined the list. With some 600 troops, Ivory Coast is currently home to the biggest remaining contingent of French troops in West Africa. Since the independence of French colonies, France had maintained a policy of economic, political, and military sway in Africa. This policy, dubbed as Francophrique, included having thousands of permanent troops in the region. But now, France has been kicked out of more than 70% of African countries. The French remain only in Djibouti, in the Horn of Africa, with 1,500 soldiers, and in Gabon, with 350 troops. The latest members announcing France's ouster, Ivory Coast and Senegal, are also members of the regional bloc ECOWAS. The group is accused by the West African junta nations of being a puppet of the West. Military leaders of Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have split from ECOWAS and have instead formed their own alliance. They have ditched ties with the West and have forged closer relations with Russia. Taking advantage of the anti-West sentiment, Russia quickly filled the void. Its mercenaries are deployed across the Sahel to help them to fight Islamist insurgents who are active in the region. As France loses its influence, political watchers believe it has been making efforts to revive its waning political and military clout in Africa. As per reports, Paris is devising a new military strategy in the continent. It is deliberately downscaling military ties, a measure that would sharply reduce its permanent troop presence on the continent. There is only one exception, and that is Djibouti. Djibouti, where France has some 1,500 troops deployed, could now assume a greater role in Paris's Africa strategy. French President Emmanuel Macron recently visited the Horn of Africa nation. He said the French military base in the country would be reinvented as a projection point for the country's missions in Africa. Currently, the base is more focused on the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Indo-Pacific than it is on Africa. But now it could focus more on Africa amid a series of setbacks in the rest of the continent. Could Macron's new strategy in Africa work out for Paris, or is it the end of Francophrique?
It's definitely the end, and that's a no. And he could save face. He can, do all this scrambling. He could say that, they're focusing more on Djibouti and all this other stuff, but it's just a trend. They're losing. People are understanding these people don't have their best interest, and this is a great development and will continue cultural. This will continue a cultural shift where different governments within the continent will start to, really think about, any foreign ties they have and any initiatives or any, economic strategies pertaining to foreign policy or just any policies doing excuse me, any policies having to do with having foreign entities in the country, because they will start to see that in order for them to become free from colonization, they need to start cutting that, tie and start, seeking, sovereignty. And not only seeking sovereignty is a good, vital, is a vital step. It will also help, instill confidence in the citizens that see that the government is doing the right thing. And then that will, spark all the youth that are the future workforce to innovate and come up with different ideas as to how they could sustain that cultural shift.
Now, for more on this, we have with us Beverly Achieng, a senior analyst, Francophone Africa at Control Risks. Achieng is joining us live from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and Happy New Year to you.
And Happy New Year to you. Let's jump right in. What are the primary reasons behind the Ivory Coast decision to ask French troops to leave? And how does this reflect the growing anti-French sentiment in the region?
Well, to be honest, it feels as if President Alassane Ouattara is preempting the growth of anti-French sentiment. This is an election year for Côte d'Ivoire, and he has to make decisive decisions to make it seem as though the election is going to be independent, that France...
As you said, Peekaboo, where is your comment? Give me 1 second. Yes. So she just brought that point up. It could be the case, but hey, I mean, he could do it and then they could elect someone new and it could backfire. Again, still, this is still a step in the right direction, whether he wants to use it for his own ulterior motive or not.
Afrique is not going to influence future politics, security, policies, or even interregional relations. Anti-French sentiment has targeted Côte d'Ivoire over the years, particularly coming from the Sahel, where military rulers they accuse Côte d'Ivoire of hosting rare bases for France. They're pro-Russian and anti-Western activists who have been targeting Côte d'Ivoire with anti-French sentiment as a way of trying to make it come from the country naturally. It hasn't happened, but if it does emerge during the election, the presence of French forces is likely to undermine that election or undermine a potential re-election of Ouattara as we wait for him to either declare his candidacy or not, and what his policy will be in the future.
And Beverly, how does the removal of the French troops from the Ivory Coast, following the similar moves by Burkina Faso, Niger, and others, impact France's strategic and security influence in West Africa?
Well, France now has to realign its presence in the region because of the hostilities coming from military governments and even from the public. So one of the things it is doing, as you pointed out, is realigning how many forces will be present in the region. Quite a number have reduced due to hostilities with governments, but also being proactive about pulling down its own troops. It also just means that France may have to think of other strategic points to be influential. So outside of politics and security, economic influence. The recent visit to France by the Nigerian President Bola Tinubu, where he signed agreements in agriculture and broad spectrum of the economy, is one area that France is looking at. And also interestingly, Kenya will be hosting one of the very first France-Africa summits, which has always been held in France. So France is looking actively for new allies while also trying to reduce its presence, especially under President Macron, because he has been the one who has faced the most backlash from Francophone West Africa. And this has had a ripple effect on French commercial interests, which are now diversifying across the continent.
And with countries like Senegal and Chad, who were once considered France's reliable partners in the continent, now also distancing themselves, what does this mean for the future of France's relationships and foreign policy in Africa? We've seen a shift in focus toward Djibouti.
Yes, I mean, the Djibouti coast is quite strategic. It's at the Red Sea. There are lots of other military bases that are present there, including China, the US. It's an area where security operations and cooperation has been quite strong given the insurgency from Al-Shabaab, but also giving it a window into some of the confluences of political interest in East and Central Africa because it extends quite a bit. So France might shift its security policy more to Djibouti and use that as an anchor to influence the region with the Al-Shabaab insurgency, win hearts and minds, particularly in Kenya, in addition to the economic policy that it's building with the France-Africa summit that will be held there. But then increasingly in the West, reduce its military political presence and only have some economic presence, given the hostilities that some French commercial interests are likely to face, given the wave of anti-French protests. But in the long run, East and even Anglophone-speaking countries might be influential to France's future policy under Macron, while in Francophone West Africa, we're going to see an emergence of other countries like Russia, Turkey, and China in commercial and security interests.
Right, and the next story, then you saw the foreign enemy from within. Now you're gonna find, the national enemy from within. And we haven't spoke about this guy, but this I don't see how this is gonna end well for him. As bro Eric says, the Most High is about to deal with all these sellouts. Yeah, right on cue, bro. Here we go. Police in Kenya fire tear gas at protest over alleged abductions. Now, as you know, there has been wide protests in Kenya over the finance bill that President Ruto suggested and, was trying to implement, that would further tax hikes on different goods and levies on different things like gas and disposable goods. And Kenya was already in economic, it was in an economic depression, but Ruto suggested that taxing the already struggling population was the answer, instead of trying to create different initiatives and incentives for people who are trying to work, or people who have different skills. He hasn't came up with any innovative ways to deal with the debt problem other than to just keep on taking foreign aid that they cannot pay back, that continues to put the country into a steeper economic hole. And primarily the youth of Kenya saw this trend and smartened up and realized that President Ruto is not doing anything in the best interest of the country. So there was wide protests, and then Ruto said he would, the government said they would, stop the proposement of the bill. And, then later down the road this year, they said they were going to enforce the bill, that the same government that, legislated the bill had, come back and said, oh no, this bill is, this bill is in the best interest of the country, because, obviously he also has, the judicial branch, the legislative branch, the executive branch, but I'm not going to talk about politics. It's just, he's, messing up, and really he's being exposed for the puppet he is. And I'm just giving you the context to this story, because now, people have been, bringing to light that people who have been protesting against the government in Kenya have been abducted and missing. and this has been going on since June and July. And you realize this is a human rights violation, and this is just lends to the corruption that they already knew that was happening and what they were protesting against.
All right, so let's relook at our top story of where the ongoing protest in Nairobi CBD, where chaos have been witnessed in Nairobi Central Business District as youth protest against rising cases of abductions in the country. The youth are demanding for their release. Our reporter Jeff Kirui is on the ground. Jeff, good afternoon. What is the latest?
Well, good afternoon, Grace. Right now we are at Aga Khan Walk along, this is at the Central Business District in Nairobi. What largely began as a quiet day took a dramatic turn at around 1:45. And this is after a group of activists chained themselves along the Aga Khan Walk. If you can see, those are live pictures actually right now. Police have tried their best to disperse them, but they are adamant. They're not leaving. They've chained themselves there. They have
Yes, that too, Peekaboo. He literally threw the vice president under the bus for all the corruption and for the dissension going on in the country. He basically impeached his running mate and basically blamed it all on him. And he's been shifting the cabinets, getting rid of different cabinets and, shuffling different leaders in those cabinets. But, he's the source of the corruption. Let me just keep on going, because this story has, for those who've been watching this show and have seen the start of it, we've been following Kenya for a while, and now things are coming to head. I don't see any other way that Kenya, how Kenya could have Ruto, governing the country. There's a huge disconnect, and it's very dangerous.
Thrown tear gas, looped tear gas at them, but they're agitating that they're not going to leave that place until all those people who have been abducted by the government are released. Remember, the president is on record several times actually saying that his administration, since he came into power, no one has been abducted by police, and anyone who's been taken by police has been taken, or rather has been a lawful arrest. But on Friday, he made a comment, or rather made a statement in Homa Bay, where he said that his government will stop any form of abductions by the government. It was perhaps a statement that was confirming that indeed the president is aware that police are abducting youth who are criticizing, or rather who are critics of his government. But the situation currently here, Grace, is that police have been deployed to man all key installations of government. We've seen a contingent of police officers, the anti-riot police, are manning parliament buildings. We've seen another contingent at the judiciary buildings. Remember, during the 25th of June invasion of parliament protest, Parliament was targeted by protesters who were actually at that time were agitating for the rejection of the Finance Bill 2023. But this particular protest is about the ongoing and the rising cases of abductions, people being taken by people who are assumed, or rather alleged to be police officers. These are in unmarked cars, not wearing any uniform, not introducing themselves. And the whereabouts of people who've been abducted so far has not been made public by the government. The Inspector General of Police, Douglas Kanja, is on record also saying that he's not aware of any abduction, but there are CCTV footage and pictures of people being bundled into unmarked cars. Some of them Proboxes, some of them Subaru vehicles, but the government still insists that that is not the police who are or rather who are abducting people. But as it stands now, the current situation here is that there is a group of activists led by Busia Senator Okia Umtata. They've chained themselves at the Aga Khan Walk. They're insisting that they're not going to leave here until the government makes a commitment, at least to ensure that all those who've been abducted are released, and the police come out to address the situation as is and inform them where they've been taken to, and ensure or tell the country about their safety. Here, police on horsebacks have been trying their best to disperse them, but they are adamant. They have said that they are not going to leave this place. They are well prepared for this. It appears like it was a well planned. It was a well planned and mobilized demonstration. We saw mobilization being done in social media platforms, the X platform yesterday, under the hashtag Monday is Mad. And they're saying that this is an end year freedom party. They're saying they're not going to leave here until those who have been abducted are released by the police. They are armed with flags, they are armed with banners, and most of their banners saying stop oppression, stop police brutality, stop extrajudicial killing, not violence. And this support to police. They are saying that is holding the constitution and calling on President William Ruto to uphold the constitution by ensuring that human rights, as stipulated in the constitution, is safeguarded, and that those of the people who have been criticizing the government are exercising their right. Not to mention the fact that there are concerns that have been raised by those in government saying that there are offensive images that are being shared on social media platforms. But this is the call right now. They're saying that Bado Mapambano. They're saying that they're not going to leave this place until all those who've been abducted by police are released. Earlier on, there was a scuffle here as well. When the police were trying to disperse them, one of the demonstrators, a human rights activist, was injured when he was pulled down, holding on to this chain that you've seen them. You see.
All right, I know it's a little hectic, but that's the scene. And this next video is just basically a shorter version of what's going on. And the link is in the chat. I just sent it there.
As they called for an end to abductions targeting government critics, Kenyan protesters came face to face with a heavy police presence. Police threw tear gas at demonstrators in an attempt to disperse the crowd, and an opposition politician and several others were arrested. Among the hundreds who had taken to the streets of Nairobi were relatives of those who have disappeared. I am here so that my child can be released. This is my child. I ask the government to please say where he is. I would rather you kill me. Here I am. Many other people are here with me. Release our children, please. The Kenyan National Commission on Human Rights has voiced concerns over a growing number of government critics who are thought to have been abducted. According to the Commission, 82 people have been abducted since demonstrations against the government in June. Rights groups accuse Kenya's police force of being responsible, allegations denied by the police, who say they are looking into the disappearances. Some protesters blame the government.
The government of President Ruto stopped abducting people. This action is by the government, which is targeting its critics. So this regime has become rogue, and we are here to demand to call the regime back to order, to demand that the regime follows the rule of law or it vacates office.
Several social media users disappeared after sharing AI-generated images.
Yes, you guys are all right. This is disgraceful. This is like a huge example of failed leadership on a massive scale. You have, people being taken. Yes, they're taking people's children. I mean, this woman doesn't even know where her own son is. He's not fighting. He's just basically exercising his right to stand up to tyranny and corruption. And Ruto hasn't done anything for the youth. He hasn't given them, any initiatives. He hasn't given them any hope. He hasn't given them any things to any steps to, have confidence in what he's doing or given them a plan for economic progression. This is really, like I'm saying, I don't know how long Ruto's time is in Kenya. It's getting crazy in Kenya. Looks to me a coup, maybe. Absolutely. I don't even think it may be even a coup because, what's to say that other African nations don't get involved when they see this going on? Their other brothers and sisters, in the different countries, seeing that their, getting abducted for standing up for their rights and, calling out, corruption. Exactly. Ruto is showing that the youth are his enemies, which is ridiculous because, these are the future people of your country and they're the future workforce and they're going to, be the ones, voting. They're going to be the ones that are going to be the future leaders of your country, and you're just displaying poor leadership. I mean, here at Quest Unite Africa, we take leadership seriously. We would create different training programs, different job programs, different career, resources to help find and hone skills and interests of the youth, so they feel, they're reassured that they have something to work for and they have something to look forward to. And not only that, that will help bring confidence in guidance from the elders. And, if you think it gets worse, if you think it's bad, the next story is going to take the cake. He admits, Kenya, Ruto admits security abuses amid kidnapping outrage. So he basically said there's credence to what they're saying. I mean, how despicable. Like, really?
Wow, and talking about the state of human rights in the country, the recent spate of abductions, as you've seen in that story, among other issues targeting online government critics, bears all the hallmarks of the deterioration of human rights in the country and is inconsistent with President William Ruto's pledge to safeguard human rights and end authoritarian tendencies that characterized the previous administration he served. Ayub Abdikadir reports on the president's lofty promise to remedy the situation, his faded out vigor, and the downward spiral in the state of human rights in the country.
He projected a persona of a calm, albeit determined presidential candidate, promising a break with the past, telling of the administration he served as deputy president for what he labeled a campaign of blunders. His focus, the state of human rights and weaponization of state institutions. And he spoke on his obvious cause of anger in his first major television interview.
How did Kenyans end up being killed?
You want to know how you could tell he's lying? His mouth is moving.
In this manner, and then it was business as usual. 30 bodies in Yala, there's 17 bodies in Garissa. I don't know how many bodies were. People. There was a container here at the Nairobi area where people were being slaughtered in a police station. How did we end up there? What kind of rogue, institution? And that is why I fired that Kinoti man. Because it's not right.
The grand gesture in ending enforced disappearances and extrajudicial killings faded with time.
It is alarming. We disregard the delegate system.
The president drifting away from the subject matter, leaving a sense of fatigue to hang over his administration. And then the massive anti-tax protests set in. A winter of historic happenings. Protesters flooding streets of major towns across the country. The government, in mounting a defense, pretended it was unaware of abductions, and with the president at the helm, purported not to know.
If there is a family, any family, that their child or their friend or their relative went to a demonstration, whether it is last year or this year, and never came back, I want to know the names, because I will take firm and decisive action. Because as I talk to you today, I don't have a single name of somebody who has been abducted or disappeared.
See, now he's trying to invalidate people's concerns. I mean, literally, what is like, what, you know, like what are they to do but, you know, cry out for help to get this guy out of office, because he's putting people's lives in danger. Cops did what to protesters? I mean, we don't know absolutely, Brother Sean. He's a liar. He's saying people aren't being abducted, and then he's saying, you know, police are using excessive force. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of confusion from what he's saying and what is happening. So there's a disconnect. But I'm pretty sure that our brothers and sisters in Kenya know what they're talking about, and they're not lying that their family members are missing, their children are missing. Again, like, this is a human rights issue.
And as the president spoke at the Lake Basin Mall in Kisumu County, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, funded by the taxpayer, on the 1st of July reported the killings of 39 Kenyans following the countrywide demonstrations.
But I have heard you, and I have heard the many Kenyans who have talked.
The past few days have witnessed a systematic targeting of government critics on social spaces. And with its constitutional mandate of protecting life and property in question, the state appears keen on broadening its mandate despite acknowledging a lack of capacity.
Tutakuwa na hatari kubwa kama taifa, and we will not have a future as a nation if we lose the young generation. And it is the responsibility of every parent. Government can do so much, but there is no government that is going to take over the place of parents.
The spate of abductions in recent days adds to the accumulating factors weighing on the Kenya Kwanza administration and on President William Ruto, in what human rights organizations say is a glaring example of government overreach in targeting online dissidents. Ayub Abdikadir, Citizen TV.
So basically, bro, Sean, it's been found out that he's been targeting people who are dissenting on his policies and how he's running the country. Basically, any of his opposition. We've seen that what he's done with the vice president. You know, as Peekaboo said earlier, he tried to, you know, make him the scapegoat, for lack of a better term, for all the upheaval and crisis and, you know, chaos going on in Kenya. But he is the ringleader of all that. And I will put the link in for that video and for this next video.
Shifting focus now to Kenya, where the growing public anger is building pressure on President William Ruto, who has now been forced to speak up. Kenyan President William Ruto has for the very first time publicly acknowledged the abuse of power by his security forces. Ruto has admitted that there have been instances of excessive and extrajudicial actions by security personnel, though he did not clarify what these actions are. The public admissal comes amid a wave of controversial kidnappings that have reignited widespread protests. Many Kenyans have hit the streets again to rally against the series of recent unexplained abductions of government critics. As per reports, over 80 people in Kenya have been missing since June, when young Kenyans were on a march against tax hikes proposed by the Ruto administration. Protesters, activists, and opposition blame the government for these abductions. Now, in the recent anti-abduction protests, several protesters have been detained, including opposition members.
We need to take action because the government, the people who are abducting or taking people, they are taking them with handcuffs and guns. So it can't be, after the financing protest of June, that is when this started. The crackdown that the government started when the president went out on national television and said that he's.
If anything, you could probably to get a picture, basically McCarthyism. And if you remember that era, I don't want to go into the geopolitical stance, but there was a time when if you criticized the government, you would be labeled a communist, and you'd be on a list, and they'd pretty much go after you to just deter you or to stop your dissension. So basically, if you need like an example, that's pretty much what's going on in Kenya. And it's unfortunate, and things need to change, but they will.
It's going to go after the people who went to parliament, who invaded parliament. That is when the abductions kicked off. That is when they intensified. We believe it's the directive of the government.
Authorities had earlier denied that government engages in any extrajudicial abductions, but now it has come down to Ruto admitting to security abuses. In fact, he has given more statements lately reflecting on his climb down approach. Ruto, who earlier called these abductions fake news, over the weekend he promised to put an end to them amid growing calls for government accountability. While President Ruto has finally acknowledged and promised action, the probe is still moving at a snail's pace. Now, that's not all. The Kenyan police have even failed to follow court orders on release of those detained as families grow desperate, demanding the release of their loved ones. Last week, the Nairobi High Court ordered Kenya's Inspector General of Police to personally produce in court by Tuesday 5 individuals who were abducted on Christmas Eve. Now, these are the most recent abductions to have taken place in Kenya. 2 of these abductees were taken shortly after sharing AI-generated images showing Ruto dead. However, the police failed to stand on the court order. Even the police inspector general did not show up and instead sent a representative in his place. So mere talk and promises might not be enough for Kenyans who demand action and accountability from the Ruto government.
I just realized I'm on mute. I just saying that's all I have for you for the rest of today, this morning. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and your Shabbat, and we will continue to see the hand of the Most High working out things for our good. It's an exciting time. Don't lose hope and be encouraged. And shalom.